Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Graham D. Collins. He's the head of partnerships over at QuotaPath, and we're going to talk compensation. Graham, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Colin. Happy to be back.
Yeah, I almost said welcome to the show, but because I wasn't it was Sarah who actually interviewed you last time you were on. So I'm great. We've been inviting back our favorite guests from the last couple of years, and I'm grateful to have you on and get a chance to have a conversation with you myself.
Wow, I'm glad I made the cut. I'm glad to hear that I'm one of the favorite guests from the past couple of years.
Yeah, you got it. The thing that we want to talk about today is kind of startup sales compensation and kind of fitting you work at QuotaPath, but also, you were the 10th hire, you've been an SDR, an AE, you've ran the SDR team at TrendKite. And so you've had a variety of different roles and a variety of different sales compensation models. I'm going to start with the biggest one that I'm sure everybody is thinking about. Talk to me about your favorite things about 100% commission roles.
Oh, I don't know if I have any favorite things about 100% commission roles. I guess from a business standpoint, my favorite thing would be that it's pretty much always beneficial to the company. But no, I don't have very many favorite things about 100% commission roles.
Yeah, me either. It is one of my least favorite things to hear on a conversation with a founder, and they're saying, "Hey, I want to hire an AE, but I want to de-risk it as much as possible." I'm like, "Yeah, talk to me about why shouldn't they de-risk it from the founder's perspective?"
I mean, from a founder's perspective, the type of person that you're likely to hire or recruit and hire, the type of person who's willing to accept a 100% commission role is not really generally the type of person that you want as an early stage sales hire. Not speaking ill of anybody who's on a 100% commission plan, but what it does is it puts all of the risk on the employee. It doesn't put any of the risk on the company itself. And so really what you're telling the employee is that I'm not willing to invest in you, but I'm expecting you to take on all of the risk and invest in us.
Could you imagine if you did that for an engineer? Say, hey, you know what? I'm only going to pay you if you can write 1,000 lines of code a month.
Yeah. I've been told, I've semi-jokingly floated in the past to have variable compensation plans for engineers based on the number of lines of code they've written. And, that was immediately shot down, and I was told why I'm an absolute moron for suggesting it.
Yeah. It's about the quality, not the quantity. And it's like, but it's kind of also about the quantity. I know that's wrong, but
yeah. Well, and then I suggested, okay, how about if it's based on the fewest lines of code written that still produce the end product? And that I was again told that I was an idiot.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, this coming from somebody who at one point in our company of 30 or 40 people, almost everybody was on a variable comp plan, except for our finance person, our accountant, and our engineers. And so I come from sales. I spent a lot of time in sales, and I'm like, everybody should have a quota. It's not always the right thing to do. It worked and it didn't work, and it just made made life really hard for Amanda, or I'm not sure what marginal benefit. I do want to think about, some of the general structures. I'd love your thoughts on, if not 100% commission for an AE, what do you recommend?
Yeah. So the way that I think about building a sales compensation plan is that you have to answer 3 questions, which is how much, for what, and how. And so the how much side is the on-target earnings, but not just the on-target earnings, but also the pay mix. So how much are they going to be earning if they hit 100% of their target? So, let's say $100,000. And so you say $100,000, and then that's their on-target earnings. And then you have to look at their pay mix. So I tend to give pay mix in what percentage of that on target earnings is base salary, followed by what percent is variable. So in your instance of 100% commission plan, that would be a 0-100. I've seen 0-100s. I've seen 100 zeros, where there is no variable for a salesperson either. The most common is a 50-50 split, where half of their on-target earnings is paid out as a base salary and half is paid as a variable. And I think that I've gone back and forth on this, on my opinions around this, but I think it's the simplest, it's the standard, and what I tend to recommend.
Right on. I'm curious how this would vary based on, there's a bunch of different factors that we could talk about. Let's start with, say, stage of a company's life cycle. If you're the first AE taking over for founder-led sales motion, or even not even taking over, say you're the first one hired and there's been nothing, is this still the right fit, or would you change it up at
all? In those situations, this then goes to the second part of the how much for what and how, which is the for what, which is the targets. In those situations, oftentimes you may have no idea what is a realistic target at all. Is it $100,000 this year? Is it $5 million this year? I mean, you may have some ideas of what a realistic target would be, but it's hard to come up with something that is reasonable and attainable. And so, which is a long way of saying, when paying a very first sales rep, sometimes 50-50 might not be the right answer, because they may end up earning substantially less than expected or substantially more than expected. And so there are, again, two schools of thought here, where no, maybe for the first year, we're going to start you out on like a 70-30, a 70% base, 30% variable, because we don't know. We have no idea what the realistic targets are, or how much it reasonably makes sense to pay you in variable. The other alternative is to say, well, no, we're actually going to pay you only 30% base salary and 70% variable, because it's your responsibility to figure it out. And it's also, we can't necessarily afford to pay a big base salary for a sales rep without any sales on the books.
Totally. I think so much of this podcast and this episode is going to be about, there's no right or wrong answer. There's going to be trade-offs for each. If you're trying to get a more senior rep, which sometimes is a good idea, sometimes is a very, very bad idea, they're probably not going to bite on a 30% base, 70% salary, unless they've made it. They worked for Crystal Decisions right before they got bought by Business Objects and then SAP. Like that's a pretty popular path here in Vancouver of, like, I know a few friends who have made it. They don't need to work, but they do.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But it's hard to hire those people, and they're not necessarily the right fit for every startup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very difficult hiring salespeople for a startup, because a lot of times they have to either be willing to take a decent pay cut for potential upside down the line, or you have to be willing to pay the big bucks. And then in that case, it's incredibly risky, because a lot of times they spend a few months figuring out the sales process and figuring out the product, only for us to realize, oh, we've been paying this person a $150,000 base salary for 6 months and they haven't done anything and they're not the right fit. So it's incredibly risky, and finding those right salespeople for an early stage startup they're some of the most important hires, and they're very risky. And it's almost like you'd be willing to pay for the right fit a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the right fit, I want to bring in an opinion and get your sense on an opinion from, I think it was Justin Welch. He was the director, VP of sales, maybe CRO at Patient Pop. I know he had a number of different roles. I just remember him and another podcast guest of mine, who I'm drawing a blank on right now. But anyway, his comment was, when he's looking for reps, he's looking for familiarity with the sales motion, not necessarily the industry. But if I'm selling a 25K ARR SaaS, I want somebody who has sold a 25K ARR SaaS, preferably into HR if I'm selling into HR. I'm curious your thoughts here. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think that finding the right hire, really you're looking for as many shortcuts as you can get. Somebody who is the best salesperson in the world who sells, machine shop parts. You drop them in for $1 million a pop. They may be the best seller in the world, but you drop them into a 30-day sales cycle, SaaS platform sales motion, and they may fall on their face. And so really just trying to find the number of shortcuts there and really just increasing your likelihood of success. And so hiring similar sales motion, similar industries, similar size, similar sales cycle. By hiring all of those, you're shortcutting and reducing your risk of finding somebody who is not a good fit.
100% agree on. It's about reducing risk. I'm curious, because we're talking about compensation, we've talked a little bit about transactional versus enterprise, sales reps. How would it differ? We talked about kind of senior, junior, 100% comp, 0% variable. What are your thoughts on if it is more of a transactional sale versus an enterprise sales motion where it could be a 12 or 18 or 24 month sales cycle?
Yeah. And this is kind of one of those funny, like, horseshoe situations where the two ends of the spectrum are actually a lot closer than you think they might be, where a lot of times very transactional, very quick sales and very long sales cycle, very relationship driven sales, a lot of times have a higher percentage of their on-target variable. There are a lot of times where it's like, no, 80% of your variable 80% of your on-target earnings is variable, and only 20% is base salary. If you have a 1-day sales cycle, 1 call close, you're expected to sell, newspaper subscriptions or whatever. Like in that instance, it's more acceptable to have it be a entirely commission-based role. Same goes for those, the person who's selling the machine shop machines that are $1 million each because they've been working in the industry for 40 years and can call up the folks on their Rolodex. And so a lot of times they're actually paid almost entirely on variable, as well as those very quick sales cycle. And it's that mid-market where you end up having the 50-50 splits.
I think everybody might be thinking, okay, so I can go hire an enterprise AE and suddenly I'm going to give them a 100K OTE and they'll take a 20K base and 80% variable. Is that accurate, or are we talking about a different kind of scale of numbers here?
Yeah, we're likely talking about a different scale here. In that, yes. I mean, if you're at that level, you're at that level. That's not going to be your first hire, and you're not going to post a job posting and have this person come apply to work for you. This is somebody in your network you've worked with in the past, and you're looking at paying them $300,000 to $400,000 a year. So these are going to be your true enterprise salespeople who are career sellers instead of, they decided I'm going to be a career individual contributor as opposed to trying to go into a leadership position, and they end up making more money than sales leaders a lot of the time.
100%. It's a different life. It's a stressful life, but it is a commitment to big, long, ugly deals and a lot of internal politics. And I love and appreciate all my friends that can do that. I've got a real close friend who does it for, I think she's at Jupiter Networks. Anyway, there's Palo Alto Networks right now. And she's making incredible bank. When I look at her and we have similar backgrounds, similar training. We would approach a sale in a similar way. She's just got much more ability to tolerate other humans for a long sales cycle than I do. Like, you throw me into that sales cycle, I'm pretty sure I drop out pretty quick. I'm not going to be a Megan, even though, I'd say for a different sales process or a different sales motion, I think I would probably outperform her if we were slinging 50 to 200K deals.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the compensation aligns with that a lot of the time. The quotas are substantially shorter. You're on a monthly or a quarterly quota period on those types of sales, whereas you're on an annual quota if you are selling the $1 million deals. And so a lot of it has to do with the sales cycle length and the average contract value that we have customers who are on weekly quotas. It's rare, but you do see those occasionally.
It seems like the quota is more of a function of the sales cycle as opposed to anything else. Like if you can close a deal, if it's a one call close, I could see a weekly making more sense. You're not going to put an enterprise salesperson on a weekly quota. It's probably going to be on an annual quota, possibly even longer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know whether it is a function of sales cycle or a function of average sales price, because those two tend to be very highly correlated as well. Mm-hmm. My rule of thumb tends to be that as long as you can close at least 5 deals during a quota period, then that's the right quota period for you. So you try to balance, you really want the shortest possible quota period, but one where you can close at least 5 deals during that quota period. To your point, if you are on a weekly quota, well, they better be able to close at least 5 deals during that week. If you're on a monthly quota, they should be able to close at least 5 deals on that month.
Really interesting. I love that kind of shortcut. I'm working with a founder right now to transition from founder-led selling to hiring his first AE. And they've hired us to help hire that AE. But along the way, I'm like, hey, how are they, like, what's your comp plan? And they're based in Europe. And so he's like, oh, it's this much per month. And I'm like, well, first off, Canada generally operates on a, annual OTE basis. So like, let's talk about that. But then 2, how are you going to get to, like, what is the split? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it 80-20? Is it X, Y, or Z? And okay, let's say they land at 50%. Well, how do you set the quota going from a founder with the founders closed to your expectations for your first AE? Because we're probably going to talk a little bit about this, but everybody knows sales comp plan changes are one of the worst things you can do to a rep, and it's important to get right. So what's your process for working out what that first quota should be? How do you communicate to the reps? Hey, this is what do you communicate to the reps? Is it, hey, this is set in stone? Or is it, hey, we're going to flex this, or we're going to try and, work this to a certain OTE?
Yeah. So, all great questions. And the way that I think about it is that your first comp plan will not be your last comp plan. And your job is not to get a perfect plan the first time. It's to make the fewest mistakes possible the first time. And so it's important to also message that to the rep. Look, this is not going to be your plan forever. I mean, maybe we nailed it. We, 1 in a million got the right plan the very first time, but this is not likely to be your plan forever. And a lot of that has to do with, well, as the company scales, you get additional resources. So you're getting more marketing, you're getting your SDRs, you're getting more leadership, you're getting more inbound leads. And because of that, more is asked of you. One way of setting a target is this concept of quota to on-target earnings ratio, where you take the person's OTE and you multiply it by some number, and that's their annualized quota. So the kind of SaaS industry golden standard has always been 5x. So you say, okay, this person's earning $100,000 on target, multiply it by 5, that's 500,000 that they should sell per year. Well, that's not always right. In fact, it's almost never right to do a perfect 5x. Instead, I would focus on, well, how big is the company? What's realistic? What have you done in the past? And triangulate. That's an okay starting point here. But more often than not, companies that are under $1 million in revenue are closer to like a 3x multiple, because they don't have all of that support. They don't have the SDR function and the marketing and the sales coaching and whatnot. And so those reps are actually expected to do 300,000. And then we triangulate. We say, okay, well, what has been done in the past? CEOs love thinking that, well, I only dedicated 50% of my time to selling, and I sold, $1 million last year. And so they could do $2 million. Well, that's a foolish thing, because founder-led sales, nobody's going to be better than the founder or the CEO than at selling. And so expecting them to do what you do is foolish as well.
I'd love to sidebar on that, because it's such an important piece that I think everybody's heard, but maybe people are still missing a little bit. If you're the founder and you sold $1 million last year and you were the only one selling, you were the company's top rep. And you would have, I think so much of sales training is less about the tactics of Miller Hyman or Bant or MedPick or Sandler, whatever this Challenger or Spark, whatever methodology you want to use. And it's more a development of empathy and understanding of the customer in all the variety of different situations that a customer could come to you in. And I don't think anybody's in a better position than a founder to make those recommendations, to help with the diagnoses. The founder understands the problem space better than anybody else. That's why they're the founder. You can't expect an AE to come in that doesn't have the CEO title or the founder title, even though they're a professional seller and know your neighborhood better than you do.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And so often people will, I see this where it's like, well, I sold $1 million, last year, and I'm the founder and I was only doing it half time. And well, no, I mean, people love buying from founders because they're passionate and they know it and they're excited and they are the ones who get those first customers, and it is their responsibility to get those first customers. But your seller is not most of those things. They may turn into a better seller than you, but at least the first year, they're not going to be that top rep.
I know you've been in second AE position, 10th hire, early in the sales org. What's your thoughts on? I think I heard you just say it, but I'd love you to expand on the founder needs to close, the first $1 million.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about but the founder needs to. You learn so much during the sales process. You learn what customers are asking for, what they pay attention to, what their eyes light up about when you're running a demo. And so a founder needs to, or founder CEO needs to be at least an important part of those first sales conversations. Maybe they're not the one getting the signature on the dotted line. Especially if they don't necessarily have the same sales experience as somebody else, but they need to be heavily involved in those first conversations because it can help guide the direction of the company. And hearing it firsthand from a customer is so much more valuable than hearing what a sales rep said a customer said.
100%. I see founder-led sales for that first $1 million, call it whatever amount you want, but first significant amount of ARR it's not a function of sales, it's a function of product. It's closing the loop of the customer development process. I want to talk a little bit about motivation and compensation. We've all heard the term salespeople are coin operated. I mean, it's true to an extent. I like to think of it as like the comp plan is the firmware that you set for an AE. It's like they're the hardware. The firmware is like how the hardware operates, and changing that firmware is a hard and clunky process. And if you get it wrong and something reboots, you can brick the device, which is, I think, very, very true with the sales team. And so I'd love your thoughts on how motivation and compensation are tied.
Yeah, and it isn't always necessarily just compensation. It's the entire compensation plan and the compensation structure. So what I mean by that is I think about motivation and rep motivation in kind of quadrants, where you have on the far left, if you will, you have the money motivated people, and on the far right you have pride motivated people. And first of all, that spectrum, now people are not going to just be one or the other, and it may shift over their careers, it may shift month by month or quarter by quarter, but the pride motivated people tend to be more motivated by being the number one seller, or hitting their quota, or doing better this quarter than they did last quarter. The money motivated people are motivated by the dollars and cents being put in their bank accounts. And then on the north-south axis, if you will, you have the public people and private people. And so your public people are the ones who want everybody to know it, and the private people are the ones who get that internal satisfaction. And so if you combine the two of those, you have the public pride people, the ones who are driving the fancy cars and have the nice watches and have they want everybody to know that they are the top seller and can afford fancy things. And your public pride people are the ones who are ringing the gongs and high-fiving people and posting on LinkedIn about how well they did last quarter. Then you have your private money people who tend to be the ones who go on nice vacations or have nice houses or treat themselves to fancy dinners but don't post about it anywhere, or just enjoy the financial security. And then the private pride people are the hardest ones to motivate, because it's often about goal setting, and it's about finding out what they care about and why, what it is about the success that motivates them and makes them feel good about themselves. And so making sure that you're setting a comp plan that motivates all four of those people can be a bit of a challenge.
I sold for 10 years before I started this, and then arguably have been selling even more ever since. And I didn't quite understand my motivation in the sales field until my mentor, Joel, sat me down and said, in the interview, to see if I would be a fit for him, he's like, I want you to stack rank these things. And there's no right or wrong answer, but money, status, people, interesting work. And like, tell me what order they're in, and tell me kind of where they sit on the priority scale. Like, is it, money is the only thing? Is it status is the only thing? And I gave him a kind of bullshit answer at first because I hadn't really considered it. And I came back a week later and I was like, you know what? It's actually interesting work is the number one, and then good people. And then I think it was like money and status were kind of tied for last place. Yeah. And thinking through that lens about this conversation, I'm like, that's why when I look at my past sales behaviors, I would crush it in the first year. Just double quota X, Y, and Z. Then the next year, I didn't care. And I'm like, okay, maybe sometimes I'd last 2 years if it was an interesting company. If I had a really, I had one company, I had a really great boss, and that kept me there for a couple of years. But it was that interesting work that I just didn't get. And it made me jump company to company to company because I was just looking for something new. And it wasn't, I was running away from a comp plan. I wasn't running away from manager. It was, I wanted to learn new things. And I think that idiot must have been the most frustrating salesperson to manage, because I had the ability to sell. I just didn't want to if I didn't want to. And I'm getting it back when I'm trying to teach one of my 6-year-olds to read. And like, that kid can read like a grade 3 if he really wants to, sure, and doesn't know how to read at all if he doesn't want to. I'm like,
Yep. There you go. No, I mean, so much of it is the curiosity. And as you go back to question around like hiring your first salesperson, curiosity is the number one thing for me that I look for in an early sales hire, because they're going to have to be intrinsically curious. They're going to have to want to solve these problems. Some of the worst early sales hires can be some of the best late sales hires. They're process people, and that you plug them in and they follow the process and they do what you tell them to do and they crush it and they are incredible. That's not me. Sounds like maybe that's not you. I'm much better at like figuring it out, being curious, making it work, doing more with less. But if you put me in a process, I'm not great. I'm not great at it, and a lot of people aren't. And so finding those early stage sellers who can help you define that process, figure that process out, they tend to be very curious. And there are interview questions you can ask to try to evaluate curiosity, but a lot of times it comes over time.
I'm curious, what are some of your questions that you ask to evaluate curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is like, if you're not being curious right now, you're probably not going to be curious later on. Like, you can teach curiosity to a point, but, one of my favorite interview questions was, teach me something you've learned recently. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be anything valuable. Before the show here, we were talking about the lead singer of Green Day. Apparently, one of his kids, his middle name is Danger. And I learned that because I was just browsing Wikipedia trying to figure out something about Green Day, and then I went to Billy Joe's Wikipedia page and read that. And so those are the kinds of things that show that curiosity, and they're like, why is that? I wonder what this is. So that's one of my favorite interview questions.
I love that. bringing it back to hiring that first AE, what should a first comp plan look like? And we've talked a little bit about it. I know Jason Lemkin has a model. I know there are conflicting opinions on it being a great comp plan, but maybe not great as a first comp plan due to the complexity of requiring a PhD in math to work out the calculations.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, I would never speak ill of Lemkin. Writes some really great stuff, does some really awesome things. The very first comp plan, as a first comp plan, I come across every once in a while where people quote this article, and to your point, it's too complicated. Like it adds layers that don't need to be added until you have more of a fleshed out team. I work for a commission tracking company, and so it seems kind of counterintuitive for me to say this, but like early on, the simpler the better for your compensation plans. Because salespeople, and as do all people, have limited amounts of brain bandwidth that they can dedicate to things. And if you're asking them to spend a substantial amount of their brain bandwidth to figure out their comp plan and how much they're going to get paid and how much they might earn off of this deal versus that deal, you're taking away from selling bandwidth. And so by creating a very, very simple, logical, and fair comp plan, you can get more out of your sellers than if you have this advanced, complicated plan that tries to fix all of the world's problems.
I agree with you. Big fan of Jason Lemkin's and all of the content he puts out there. I would also add the complexity of, as a manager, to try and figure out how to get that comp plan right would be a challenge.
Yeah.
Like, how do we set all these? It's like stepping into, hey, you're going to learn to drive. All right, let's jump into an F1 car with like the big fancy steering wheel with the 87 buttons. It's a great car. It's possibly the best car out there, depending on your definition of best. But as somebody trying to learn, I was a big fan of my 86 Honda Civic stick,
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody cared. I might crash that thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the same thing goes for comp plans. No, I mean, and that's absolutely right. Is that the fewer levers you have to pull, the more the more when something actually has an impact. I oftentimes see somebody say like, look, this is our comp plan, and then put the thud factor down on the desk, and it's like, oh boy, yikes. But oftentimes people try to correct for or control behaviors using exclusively the comp plan. And yes, the comp plan is one tool you can use to drive those behaviors, but there are other tools that you can use to drive those behaviors. Things like discounting rules. That's one thing I see a lot where somebody's like, oh, you earn 10% of the deal unless you've discounted it more than 10%, in which case you only get 9% of the deal unless you've discounted it more than 20%, in which case you get 8% of the deal. Those could be solved using discounting rules and approvals and things like that. Or another thing that comes up a lot is like, we're really trying to get our reps to log everything in a CRM. So you don't get paid unless you log everything in a CRM. It's like, well, that's just coaching. You just need to be a better coach and explain the value and the impact of actually logging that information in the CRM. Don't use your comp plan, one of your very valuable tools, to try to drive what should be a relatively simple lesson.
Mm-hmm. I've seen too many. I've worked for a few organizations that had almost weaponized the comp plan of like in thinking back about the comp plan, they had given up entirely on people management, and they wanted to manage people entirely through, this is how we're going to pay you. So all you are is a slot machine or a pinball machine. Quarters go in, money comes out. And other than that, and like your SOL, no coaching, no anything.
Right.
And like,
you
can kind of smell that.
Oh, of course. And a lot of times the messaging within the comp plan, even though it accomplishes the exact same thing, can be perceived in a punitive or a negative way. Like the example that I always think about is, let's say I'm a business that can sell 1 year, 2 year, 3 year contracts. If I go to my AE and I say, you earn 20% of every deal you close, as long as it's a 3 year deal. and you earn negative 5 percentage points if it's a 2-year deal, and another negative 5 percentage points if it's a 1-year deal. The rep then says, okay, so I'm not earning 20. Sometimes I'm earning, whatever. But then it feels like you're taking it away from me. And there's a great book, a Dan Ariely book, Predictably Irrational, where he talks about loss aversion. And in his example, it's like, if I give you $10, have you flip a coin, and if it's heads, I'll give you another $10. Or if I give you $20 and have you flip a coin, and if it's tails, I take $10 away. The outcome is the exact same, but people leave it feeling very, very different. And so the same thing can be done with comp plans here. If I tell you earn 20% and then I take away 5 percentage points if it was only a 2-year deal, you feel a lot worse than if I say, hey, you earn 10% of everything you sell. And if you sell a 2-year deal, you get an extra 5%. And if you sell a 3-year deal, you get an extra 10%. They're the exact same plans, but just the messaging and the way that you present it, you can use that loss aversion to your advantage.
Love that. So if you were to summarize, what a good comp plan looks like for your first AE hire, what would that look like?
Simple. And I mean, the rules that I have for every comp plan are that they should be simple, logical, and fair. Simple in a first plan is very, very important, because you may not understand the logic behind it. You may not know what is fair. And so simpler the better on this. My favorite type of comp plan, I think, is probably just a flat commission. Just pay flat 10% commission off of every deal that's closed, because it's a blank slate. It's an empty page, and it allows you to add that complexity as needed. Maybe, hey, we're not selling any multi-year deals, and our customers are willing to buy multi-year deals. Oh, okay. Well, then let's add in an accelerator for multi-year deals. Or, hey, we have these people who are really underperforming, and then these other people that are really overperforming. Oh, okay, well, then we'll add in an accelerator and a decelerator. But a flat commission rate gives you that blank template to work off of.
I love that. Say you've got a number of AEs and you're trying to hire your first manager. What would that look like? How would that change? Because 2 different sports.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, there are 2 different types of managers as well. There's the strict people manager, where all they do is manage a sales team. And then there's the team lead style, which is often the case for early stage startups, where they say, hey, Sally has been doing a great job. She coaches reps. She closes her own deals. We're starting to hit a scaling point now where I can't, as the CEO, I can't lead the sales org. I'm going to have Sally step into a team lead role. And she's going to continue selling, because there are only 4 reps, there are only 3 people under her. That's not a full-time job. I'm going to have her continue selling. And that's very, very common. It's also the hardest job in a company, to be a player coach, to be a team lead on the sales team, in my opinion.
I strongly agree. I think the second hardest job is the first sales manager for a sales leader at a startup, because it is such a wide role. You are doing sales ops, rev ops. You're doing sales enablement training. You're doing onboarding. You're doing hiring. Oh, and you also have to manage people.
Yep. Oh yeah. No, that's a challenging one as well. I've been in that situation before. And so, I mean, then when you are building a team comp plan, again, it depends on what you want that person to do. Do you want them to manage a team? If so, well, it could be as simple as taking what the AE comp plan looks like and applying it to the entire team. So, but instead of getting a flat 10% of everything anyone sells, you're getting a flat 2% of anything anyone sells. Now we're adding in that overlay, though. And so now commissions are getting more expensive. And this is where then, because they have this overlay, it's required for people to sell even more. And that's why those quotas may go up over time.
Gotcha. They've got to go up so you can kind of justify the investments investing in the sales team, investing in building out the training and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, and another thing that you have to be cognizant of another thing that you have to be cognizant of is that sometimes it benefits the sales manager to keep their team small, right? But there are situations where it benefits the sales manager to grow their team. If all you're doing is paying 2% off of every sale that comes in, well, I'm going to hire a giant team, because even if they're all hitting 50% quota, as long as it's a giant team, I'm earning more. And so you have to be cognizant of the behaviors that you're encouraging your sales leader on. Is, if they only have to manage 2 people based on those 2 people's quota attainment, well, why would they bother hiring a third? But if they're paid a flat percentage off of anything anybody sells on the team, well, they're going to want to hire as many people as possible just to get any supplemental dollar. And
totally. I'm curious. This is a trap I've seen people fall into. It's call them the super AE, that it's a sales manager, maybe this player coach kind of person, and they are still, I guess, stuck in the sales process where they are running everything. And if they leave or go on holidays, everything grinds to a halt, even though you've got 3 AEs. Have you seen this before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a common issue, and one that doesn't feel like an issue at the time, because it's like, hey, heroics, we're getting it done, we're closing all of these deals, but can cause a lot of issues if that person leaves, or they go on, or you try to scale the team because maybe they can do it for 4 AEs, but they can't do it for 40 AEs. And so in that situation, once you've identified that that's the problem, that's when you really focus around process and replicating what that person does, and trying to teach your AEs to fish instead of the sales manager fishing for them.
Fair enough. It does seem like naturally, eventually, every team's going to need, as you expand your AE team, as you add in a manager, you're going to start to need to add in some complexity to the sales plan, maybe some territories, maybe some lead distribution. How do you know when the right time is to start adding those additional complexities?
I think that what I had said before around, like, when there are times where there are behaviors that you're looking to drive and you feel like they can be driven using the sales comp plan, that may be the time to explore including a complexity in your comp plan. And so, a complexity, the most common complexity that I see in comp plans are accelerators. Okay, you earn 10% until you hit your quota, and then you earn 15% of anything you sell above your quota. Those are pretty common. More than half, almost 2/3 of comp plans that I see actually have an accelerator, which is great. I actually think that it is a very valuable component of a comp plan. But you really would only want to do that if you see your reps hitting those targets and perhaps stopping, hitting exactly 100% of their targets. Or if you want to encourage those reps to overachieve or continue selling once they hit that target. And then the next complexity would be adding some sort of decelerator. And you would do that if you have those top performers and you have underperformers, where it's like, look, these people are chronically hitting 50% of quota, and group B is hitting 50% of quota, and group A is hitting 150% of quota. And there are probably systemic issues within there as well, but that may be an indication to you that, hey, let's take the money that we would be paying to that underperforming group and actually give it to that overperforming group as part of an accelerator.
Interesting. I'm curious. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Any final comments and words on compensation? Anything we missed in your eyes? I got one last question for you, not really related.
Sure. Well, I mean, compensation is such a core part of what sales teams do, but it is oftentimes an afterthought. And why do people work in sales? Because that's where the money is. And yes, interesting work. I agree with all of that there, but you could be an engineer if you want. If you're, well, I couldn't be an engineer, but maybe you could be an engineer if and find interesting work there. But at the end of the day, like, the amount of money that somebody is earning is very important to them, especially if they work in sales. And so don't make compensation an afterthought. Make it something that you are actively discussing and thinking about even before it is too late, or, feels like it's too late to have that conversation.
Love it. I noticed in the news your biggest competitor just got bought by Salesforce, which can be scary for some, I think can be amazing for others. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you do at QuotaPath.
Yeah, absolutely. So QuotaPath, we're a commission automation platform for RevOps, sales, and finance organizations. So we automate the entire commission process from beginning to end. So calculating the commissions and, building the comp plan, calculating commissions, scheduling payouts, having deals approved and reps flag deals, the earnings are incorrect, all of that, that entire process. So that's what QuotaPath does. And yeah, to your point, a company called Spiff was just acquired by Salesforce, and I'm happy for them. I actually have spent a decent amount of time with the Spiff folks. They're wonderful people. I've seen them at conferences and trade shows, and we've always gotten along well. I'm happy for them, and it makes sense. Spiff has been closely aligned with Salesforce for a long time, and it is exciting in a few ways. One is that it's validation for the market, right? Is that, hey, there are bigger companies interested in commission automation, and they see it as a core component of the sales process and not an afterthought. And then the other thing is that we personally have invested really heavily in the HubSpot ecosystem. And part of that is that HubSpot Ventures is an investor in QuotaPath. And so they've been heavily invested literally in our success for a while now. And so it's cool validation as well to see that, hey, yes, we can be a part of the Salesforce ecosystem. Absolutely. Just because Salesforce acquires a company doesn't mean that there are no competitors out there, right?
Totally.
But it's really validating for us as well, the work that we've done and continue to do as part of the HubSpot ecosystem as they grow their CRM presence with their Sales Hub.
One thing I do love about QuotaPath is the pricing is a lot more reasonable than some of the others I've seen in the market. We looked into a number a few years ago. I've interviewed a few of them on the podcast and had conversations with them afterwards. And I'll say the pricing in some of them was designed purely for SaaS folks that were making huge amounts of money and not small SDR teams. And because the numbers that I looked at made my eyes bleed, but QuotaPath didn't make my eyes bleed. So I appreciate that about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the transparency of pricing as well, goes to the, you can see exactly how much HubSpot costs. You can go on their website. They've got a calculator that just changed their pricing at the beginning of this month. So I've used it a few times to try to figure out how much HubSpot costs for our customers, as we're referring folks, but transparent pricing. And really that also goes to, we are able to be less expensive because we spent a lot of time being product led and allowing self-service and organizations to build comp plans themselves. Yes, we help you out with it. We train you on it, but every little change doesn't require us to go in and fix things for you. And so we're able to pass those savings on to the customer.
Graham, if somebody's looking to get in touch with you, either to pick your brain on compensation or to get in touch about QuotaPath, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn for me personally. As Colin said at the beginning here, it's Graham D. Collins on LinkedIn. The D does not stand for danger, unfortunately. But feel free to find me on LinkedIn, and then also QuotaPath.com. And my email is, I was early enough at QuotaPath that it's just a Graham@QuotaPath.com.
Right on. And in case you haven't looked at the podcast episode, Graham with an H.
Yeah. Yep. And GRAHAM. There's no E in there. There's no, And for our friends across the pond, it'll be Graham.
There you go. Graham, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to have you back, interview you for my first time. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Colin.
Great getting a chance to get to know you. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see y'all next week.